Welcome, everyone. I am Amanda Nicholson, Director of Finance and Operations at the Product Stewardship Institute, also known as PSI. We are so pleased you can join us this week for Rolling Out the Carpet to Recycling and the Circular Economy, our two-part web symposium with carpet EPR experts, U.S. carpet recyclers, and U.S. manufacturers using recycled carpet polymers in new products and packaging. Day one will focus on policy, and day two will focus on carpet recycling technologies. Today's session centers around Carpet Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. In Carpet EPR 101, we'll learn about the vital elements of carpet EPR programs and the recent surge in carpet EPR bills, as well as carpet recycling benefits and new technologies fueling markets. In the second part of today's session, Making the California Program a Success, we'll hear about the initiatives of the Carpet America Recovery Effort, known as CARE, that have increased recovery over the last few years, even in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the final panel of today's program, contemporary policy models from Illinois, Minnesota, New York, and Oregon, we'll hear from three carpet EPR experts about new policy models designed to address state-specific interests, the opportunities for harmonization among these models, and what these bills could mean for other types of floor coverings. We invite you to stay with us after the last session from 3 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time for extended Q&A and discussion with our speakers. We have a terrific panel of speakers for you today and an equally great lineup tomorrow. We encourage you to join us again Wednesday for the second session, when we'll explore how carpet is collected and processed, learn about 4 circular uses for recycled carpet polymers, and hear about the environmental drivers for enhanced carpet recycling. But before we move on, I'd like to pass the mic to Brendan Adamczyk, who will cover a few logistical items to ensure everyone is able to participate smoothly. Brendan?
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, folks. I'm Brendan Adamczyk. I'm an associate for policy and programs here at PSI, where I work on EPR for carpet, as well as paint, packaging, and solar panels. My colleague, Gabby Queenan, who's PSI's policy and programs intern, and I will be providing tech support for today and tomorrow's event. Gabby, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Next slide, please. Okay, so for this webinar, just a couple logistics. You have the option of joining either via telephone or computer audio. If you want to select your audio options or switch audio during the event, you can click on audio settings in the lower left corner of your screen. From there, you can also test your speaker and your mic or switch between multiple audio devices that may be connected to your computer. You can also change your view of the screen, as you can see here, to select or exit full screen, or to zoom in or zoom out. You can click on view options at the top of your screen. And if you have any questions, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom center of your screen. Whether you have a technical question, such as help with your audio or your video, or a content-related question, such as clarification on a particular point that a speaker has made, you can type your question on the field that reads type your question here, and then click the send button. Gabby and I will answer any technical questions that you might have, while our moderators, Amanda or Scott, will ask these questions aloud during the Q&A period at the end of each part of today's session, if they're content related. And lastly, all of PSI's events are recorded, so you can listen again or catch any that you've missed. The recording of today's event will be posted to the Carpet Symposium webpage within 48 hours, and you'll receive a direct link to the webpage via email after the event. You can also find the recording of today's webinar and any other web events that have been put on by PSI in the past in the on-demand webinar section of our website. As you can see on your screen here, just click events at the far right of the menu, then click on demand webinars. And without further ado, I'll turn it back over to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Brendan. And not to delay anything further, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, PSI's very own Scott Cassell. Scott is CEO and founder of the Product Stewardship Institute, whose consensus-driven and evidence-based approach has achieved unparalleled success in creating lasting solutions for product and packaging waste in the US. Scott, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Amanda, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Just for those that don't know the Product Stewardship Institute, we are a national nonprofit. We've been building capacity for product stewardship in the US for the past 20 years. We have membership from 47 of our states and hundreds of local governments. We also have about 120 different partners, mostly companies, but also organizations, including environmental groups, institutions, and international governments as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just give a little historical discussion because carpet in the United States is a topic that has been one that we've worked on for quite a long time here. And I thought that just starting from what's happened and what's changed really more recently for this. So here's a timeline that we used actually in a 2014 stakeholder meeting that we conducted in Connecticut. And I wanted to just acknowledge, going from the far left, you'll see January 2000, there was meetings that the US Environmental Protection Agency convened with Midwest states, and our very own Garth Hickel, who you'll hear from shortly, was participating in those. I was actually in the state of Massachusetts at that time, brought the state on board. I think it was in '98 or somewhere even before then. So there were discussions on carpet very early on. And because of that and other reasons, carpet was one of the top 5 issues that PSI worked on in our inauguration, our first conference in December of 2000. Following this timeline, you'll see 2002 is when there was a voluntary memorandum of understanding signed by the carpet industry and government trying to do things voluntarily. Then looking at the EPR law being passed in California, that was in 2010, so 8 years later. And right after that, we see here that the MOU goals that were established by the US EPA were not achieved. So perhaps this is one of the reasons why this industry law was passed in California to try to move forward in some what they were calling market-based carpet recycling. Moving further down on this timeline, you'll see in November 2013, and these are the green squares here, PSI developed an elements document, a model bill that we came up with. And just before that, actually, Minnesota had introduced legislation. So there was interest in developing legislation on extended producer responsibility in some of the other states. So after we developed our model, then Illinois introduced legislation. And then we had our stakeholder meeting in 2014, and we developed a background briefing document at that time. So you see there's a lot of effort here in the United States over those past 14 years. Next slide, please. So in 2014, what was the problem? And I'm showing these slides because really a lot hasn't changed, but there are some things that really have changed. And I'm going to be focusing on 1, policy, and 2, the technological innovations and advancements. So on the problem, you'll see, it's bulky, heavy material, costly to manage. There's a lack of recycling infrastructure in place, certainly collection as well, lack of awareness about how carpet could be recycled. At that time, there was difficulty in separating fibers, nylon, polypropylene, PET, the lack of markets for polyester. This was a big issue, moving from nylon to polyester. There was an increased cost for many of the recyclers at that point. And these are the things that we're going to be discussing over the next 2 days. You'll see still a lot of tons generated in the United States. It's down 500,000 tons from 2014. Recycling has increased, but still 9% in the US, higher in California because of the law that is there. Next slide, please. So in 2014, we had these dialogue goals, and I think you could say these are pretty much goals that we still have today, maximizing the collection and recycling of the scrap carpet. We want to alleviate the financial burden on governments and taxpayers, have a sustainable industry, sustainable financing. We want to have more of the recovered carpet being put back into recycled products. Carpet to carpet is the highest use, but also carpet to other recycled products. And then we want to support the businesses that are the collectors, that are the processors, that are the remanufacturers. Next slide. So again, taking some of the issues that were prevalent in 2014, the carpet design changes really did increase the cost of recycling. At that time, as I mentioned, there was PET grew from 5% from 2009 to 40% in 2014. It's expensive, the PET, to recycle. Kind of the costs were pushed downstream, if you will, to the recyclers. And then there weren't many markets at that point. We were struggling. Next slide. Also, yes, the lack of markets lowers the value of what is collected. And so we needed more of those end markets. There was a lot of these carcasses called, if you will, because of the lack of end markets, what to do with these materials. Next slide. And then, of course, without the markets, a lot of this was landfilled, still is being landfilled now. We have a lot of opportunity right now, 2018, 73% being landfilled. A lot of this material is mixed. It's building waste and can get contaminated, wet, and no longer usable as well. Next slide. So coming forward now from 2014, we have California's law has been amended twice, 2017, 2019. We've had bills that have been introduced again in Illinois, Minnesota, New York, and a new bill in Oregon on extended producer responsibility. Our organization's held webinars. We've done a how-to guide on collecting and processing carpet. We've developed and refined the policy model. Many others have done lots of other things as well on carpet recycling. But end markets for carpet have grown due to significant investment and technological developments. Next slide. So why is EPR for carpet needed? This is the same thing we talk about for many other products. We work on 25 different products, so this is only one of them right here, but it does provide that sustainable funding that's needed in order for the carpet to be collected, recycled, and taken off the backs of the governments for this, having sustainable financing, giving incentives to manufacturers to design a carpet that has greater post-consumer value to it. So higher value in the back end means greater markets as well. And then it will boost recycling rates, create recycling jobs. This is what we see happen on all EPR programs when they're put in place, and it'll untap these billions of dollars of potential value that we have all along the supply chain. Next slide. Well, this map actually looked very much the same in 2014 as well, except for the addition of Oregon. These were the states that had bills, and California had the law. So not a whole lot has changed. Next slide. But what has changed is the top two here are ones that I've talked about before. There's best practices for EPR policies. We have now figured out, all of us, PSI and others working on all the bills. There's 120 EPR laws that have passed around the country on 14 products in 33 states. We know what the best practices are. And there's been technological developments. So we're going to be talking about policy today and those technological developments tomorrow. Greater end markets, greater opportunities for returning scrap carpet to the circular economy. Other things that are the backdrop, the context for what's happening, climate change, of course, it's been there for a decade, 2 decades or so. We've all been aware of this, but there's something new right now. There's an understanding that EPR, materials management, is a significant component of a climate change strategy. But we're seeing it with batteries. We're going to see it more for other materials as well. And carpet is one that's made from the oil. So we have an opportunity here to reduce greenhouse gas impacts by recovering the carpet and reusing these fibers and materials again. Plastics pollution certainly has brought the plastics component face to face for all of us. Toxics, PFAS, and the flame retardants and other materials as well. There's a greater interest in removing these from carpet and other materials. China soared. It's brought in our minds the understanding that we can't keep shipping low quality materials around the world. We need to have a domestic recycling infrastructure in our country. And also there's been, I'd say, an uptick of increased acceptance of EPR from producers. We've seen this on packaging for 15 years. Many of the brand owners on packaging were very resistant, waste management industry, very resistant, and now are facing the real possibilities of EPR for packaging. Well, this translates into carpet as well, because it is a way to manage all of our waste material here in the United States, as it has been in Europe, in Canada, and rest of the parts of the world. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into this elements document, but these are the 15 elements that are standard in all bills that PSI develops and works with around the country. Just a couple here. You have, the definition of responsible party is very much the same. How do we govern these systems designed for the environment? Those eco-modulated fees. How do we give incentives for the manufacturers to be making better products, performance standards, convenience standards, and other things like this. So these are things that we all have a much greater understanding and facility about, and we're able to have higher level conversations, all of us, including producers, waste management industry, environmental groups, and others. Next slide. And here is the recycling economy. So this is, again, day 2 tomorrow. If we start down on the bottom right, the collectors, we're going to hear from the Solid Waste Association of Lake County, what they're doing to collect the scrap carpet and how they plan ahead for the EPR bill that they have in place. Once it's collected, that it goes to the processors and recyclers like Aquafil, Circular Polymers, Eastman, and Pure Cycle Technologies. And then once that material is processed, it goes to the new product manufacturers, some of which are the same as the processors and the recyclers. So you have Aquafil, Pure Cycle, and then also Rise Composite Technology. So that is the circular economy that we're looking to enhance through the policy. Next slide. So these are the companies and their brands. I just wanted to make the point, if I haven't fully done that yet, that policy is really needed to combine with technology to bring us into that circular economy. Next slide. And these are all the benefits, mentioned them before, incentives, high value carpet content, reduction in toxics, recycled content, technological development. It's going to maximize collection, reuse, and recycling, and minimize costs, minimize disposal, and minimize the use of natural resources, as well as the use of toxics. So that's the context that I just wanted to lay out today. And I'm going to now hand it back over to Amanda.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for that great overview of where we've been with carpet, where we are with carpet. And I think tomorrow we might hear a bit more about where we're going with carpet, even today during our policy discussion. We have some questions that have come in, and I have some of my own as well. But let me start with one here from Alicia. Alicia asks if there is, or if we have, model language that could be included in bid solicitations to increase the recyclability of carpet and ensure that it gets recycled. And this sounds like a procurement question to me, or a contract demolition type of a policy, not specifically an EPR policy. Do you know if that's been worked on, Scott?
Hi, Alicia, and Alicia is an expert on procurement, so it's definitely a procurement question. And so I don't have the model language myself, but I see Bob Peoples may be typing an answer here. Perhaps in our next panel, there'll be an answer, but we can follow up with that. It's a great question in terms of what we may be able to do for the procurement of carpet. You, of course, want to, when you procure it, you want to make sure that that carpet can be, is being recycled as well. So for the governments and others that would tap into these procurement contracts, it's a really good question.
Thanks, Scott. I'd like to bring one up because toxics is a big issue across products, especially as we talk about the circular economy. We don't really want to recirculate stuff that isn't good for us in new products, especially if it's difficult to trace them from the original product to the new product or products that it's made into. How are EPR policies, like the elements, being designed to address toxics specifically in producer responsibility laws?
Well, let's just say that EPR laws are not the only policy out there to remove toxics, right? There's some like PFAS that are there's bans on these, and you can include a ban in an EPR bill itself, or it could be separate. So EPR is just one of the tools. The other is through eco-modulated fees by giving incentives and disincentives. So if there are toxics that are bad, but not to the point where policymakers are saying they need to be banned, then the differential fees, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about in our session today on policy, you can give differential fees. So a producer would pay more if they have a product that has toxics and would pay less if it has less toxics or no toxics. And the same with other types of materials. Recycled content would have a lower fee. No recycled content would have a higher fee attached to it. So there's various ways that those fees can be modulated. So that's the way that would be done.
Great, thanks, Scott. We have one that Bob would like to answer, but another one that I think is more policy related. So I'll address that one first. Adriana has asked if the financial responsibility has to be only on producers, in your opinion, or if it might work better if there was a shared financial responsibility among stakeholders.
Well, the issue of full responsibility and shared responsibility is one, I'd say it's one of degree. So first, let me just say the term shared responsibility in my mind is what EPR is, whether or not the producers are paying fully and managing the system fully, because every stakeholder has a role to play. So the state government has an oversight and enforcement function. The local governments usually have an opportunity to collect. They're an interface with their residents. They educate. You have environmental groups that have a viewpoint in there. You have the collectors, you have the recyclers. So everybody has a responsibility, and EPR laws are a network. It creates a network of accountability. So that's the first thing. When you're talking financially, what most people will say about EPR is if the producer eventually has that full responsibility, first of all, it'll have a greater chance of internalizing those costs. What we're trying to do is internalize what are now externalities, the impacts on the environment and the costs that are being put onto governments, taxpayers, and ratepayers. So internalizing that really makes it so that the product that you buy has the true cost in that product. Now, if it's shared, it could be, there's various ways it's been done. We've seen it in Canada, particularly over time. Those shared responsibility systems of financial responsibility have shifted over the past, say, 15 years. Quebec is maybe the latest that has moved in that direction. of shared responsibility to full producer responsibility and financial. So that's the direction, and it gives a greater financial signal to the producer to change the method in which they're making their products. So it's fully internalized.
Great. I am seeing a whole lot more questions come in. We don't have time for all of them right now, but we are going to answer those questions in the extended Q&A period at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, so please stick with us. At this point, Scott, I'm actually going to take my moderator hat off and hand it over to you and let you introduce our next speaker who would like to answer one of our lingering questions aloud, so that will give him a great opportunity to do so. Scott?
Great. Thank you, Amanda. So our next speaker is Bob Peoples, and Bob is the current and founding executive director of Carpet America Recovery Effort, better known as CARE, where he works to implement market-based solutions for post-consumer carpet reuse and recycling. Bob will present for about 20 minutes on CARE's initiatives in California. Then we're going to have 10 minutes of Q&A. So please send in your questions into that Q&A box as soon as you have them, and then I will answer them at that time. So Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today to speak about a topic that I'm very passionate about and have dedicated a large portion of my career to try to help enable. My goal today is to try to share with you facts and some experience from some hard-earned lessons. I'm a scientist by training, and I'll share a little bit more about that in just a minute. So trying to help guide decisions with factually based information and experience is really a critical part of what I do. So let me get started and just give you a little bit more background about me. I worked for Monsanto and Solutia, the spinoff company, for 23 years. And during my tenure at Monsanto and Solutia, I was responsible for all of our carpet recycling efforts in that capacity. I represented Solutia in the work group that led to the creation of CARE in January of 2002, which Scott mentioned in his timeline. And unfortunately, in 2004, my company filed for bankruptcy, and I left the company at that time and became CARE's first executive director. I did that for several years, trying to get our infrastructure planted and in place. And in the spring of 2008, I set out for Washington, D.C. to become the director of the Green Chemistry Institute right there. But in 2012, I like to say CARE lives its mission. We recycled the executive director, and I came back in the fall of 2012 to take on the mantle at CARE, and at the same time inherited the California program that had been passed while I was in Washington. I'd like to emphasize that we started with a blank sheet of paper, and there were some clearly unrealistic expectations set. I think we had some unrealistic expectations in terms of how quick things could happen at a national level and also at the state level. We had a lot of input from people that really didn't have experience running a business or executing capital projects, and they were providing input, creating some of these unrealistic expectations. It's interesting that what I've come to appreciate over the years is that every single recycler in the carpet recycling world is different. And I don't just mean they're different companies. I mean, there is no two recyclers of carpet that practice the same technology. They have different equipment, different economics, different end market products that they serve, and that adds to the challenges of managing this program. All of this combined to create an environment which was fairly turbulent for the first 6 years or so while we were getting our feet on the ground. But once we gained traction, we started to make progress. So let me talk a little bit about some background information about California. While a lot of carpet is being sent to California, the topic of exactly how much is still a bit debatable. It is shrinking because a lot of it ties to the sales of new carpet, and new carpet sales are declining. We kind of use a rough estimate based on years of experience that says there's about 10 pounds per person per year that gets generated in any geographic location. So if you know the population in a certain radial area, you can get an estimate of what the carpet flow is going to be. Obviously, if we send carpet to the landfill, we've eliminated our ability to recover a valuable resource. That valuable resource is primarily represented in the face fiber, which is a polymer, but also to a certain extent in the backing material. A lot of that is calcium carbonate, and we generally refer to that as PC4, or post-consumer carpet calcium carbonate, in case you come across that term. PC4 is really a byproduct of the face fiber recovery. No one makes PC4 on purpose. The California Stewardship Law was passed in 2010 and went into effect in July of 2012, and I'm sorry, 2011. And the goal was to set up a network of collectors, processors, carpet manufacturers, and to help create new jobs in the state and the capacity to consume the carpet that was being generated in the state. As I said, it took a few years to figure this out, but beginning in 2015, we began to see things moving in the right direction. So just a comment about CARE. It's a national resource which is based on advancing market-based solutions to increase landfill diversion and recycling of post-consumer carpet and to encourage the design for recyclability. CARE is a nonprofit, and today we sport over 100 members, ranging from manufacturers of carpet itself and recycled content products to retailers, recyclers, collectors, and some non-governmental organization. We also are designated in the original carpet stewardship law in California as the Carpet Stewardship Organization under AB 2398. As you could see, the original law was passed, and then two additional laws were passed, AB 1158 and AB 729. Both are considered by CARE to have been flawed legislation. Why? Because there was a lot of misunderstanding of what the reality of carpet recycling is like, and it creates a misunderstanding, but also unintended consequences. A law gets passed, and then when you go to implement it, things happen that you didn't think through ahead of time. So obviously CARE must comply with the law, and that's what we are doing, and we're doing it with a great deal of effort and energy at this point in time. AB 729 went into effect in 2020, and this added the additional requirement of differential assessments based on the financial burden to recycle the material and to also take into consideration post-consumer content. So Amanda, let's see, I'm on slide 4. I'm sorry, I didn't give you a heads up on that, I guess.
No worries, sir, Bob. Just let me know when you want to move forward.
Yeah, let's go over to slide 5, and then I'll try to keep that going for you here. So the program is funded by a mandatory consumer assessment charged on every square yard of carpet sold in the state of California, and that's collected at retail. Today, that assessment is 35 cents per square yard, and that is up 700% since the program began in 2011, when we were at 5 cents a square yard. And just to kind of try to put that into perspective for you, if the average home person was purchase was about 900 square feet, that's an extra $35 on a purchase that will range anywhere from $1,500 at the low end to $4,000 or more for a typical residential dwelling. In 2020, we sold about 66.7 million square yards of carpet in California and collected $23 million based on the assessment that's charged. Now, CARE sales in California have been declining every year since that particular point in time. So let's take a quick look at sales and how they impact the funding effort. So if we can go to slide 6, you could see there's been a steep decline in carpet sales over time. This is important as the assessment for new carpet sales provides the funding for the program in California. Many factors impact sales, and the steep drop in 2020 was really driven by the Q2 impact of COVID, so not a surprise to anyone. But you'll note that decline year over year has not only been downward, but accelerating. Our 2021 budget is only 68 million square yards a year, and so the assessment funds, how we use them, I'll share in just a second. But the consequences when one considers looking at the integrated picture of the impact on jobs and sales and the real cost for carpet recycling. The two big factors that we see impacting here are the assessment that's charged on the carpet and also the competition from alternative floor coverings, in this case LVT, or what's known as luxury vinyl tile. It's been seeing double-digit growths in the marketplace for a considerable period of time. Many of the people believe that the carpet waste is just that, a waste, and there should be a minimal charge associated with any kind of recycling. But I think most folks on the phone know that it costs money, sometimes a lot of money, to collect, to sort the different types out, to bale them, to ship them, that someone can actually process the carpet to liberate the materials of interest and then convert those materials into useful products. We compete against virgin materials and post-industrial materials. Most often these are white or uncolored materials and very clean compared to the colored and contaminated feedstocks that we derive from post-consumer carpet. So we talked about the assessments fees. Let's see how those are used. If we can go to slide 7. You'll see that the vast majority of the dollars go to the recyclers in the form of subsidies. 76% for the data shown here for 2020. We just completed our Q1 analysis for 2021, and in the case of Q1, over 70% of our funds went to the recyclers. So we put a lot of money into the system to enable the recycle of these difficult commodity materials. The next largest chunk goes to grants, education, and outreach, both of which are required under our approved plan. I also would just like to put into perspective that our administrative costs, which include the fees that we must pay the Cal Recycle organization to oversee our program, totals about 10%. So we like to view this as we run a very lean and a very efficient operation to deliver these results. So if we can go to the next slide. Here are the major program goals that are included in the legislation and are identified in Cal Recycle's approved carpet stewardship plan, which CARE wrote and is responsible for executing. These are the guiding principles for our program as we go forward. I'm not going to try to read through all these. You could look through the list, and I think it's just important to recognize that there are multiple elements associated with trying to achieve a successful program. So it's not just picking one and focusing on that. There's a lot of detailed elements that have to be taken into consideration. Amanda, if we can go to the next slide. This will show you some of the results that we've been able to achieve. Right now, we talk about a recycling rate, and we have a statutory recycling rate of 24% by January 1st of 2020. We did not achieve that level of recycling, but I think it's interesting to note, some people talk about the recycling rate and some people talk about the yield. The recycling rate is the amount of recycled output that's produced divided by the total number of pounds that we believe are potentially flowing to the landfill, whereas the yield looks at the recycled output divided by the total pounds of material collected. And over the last several years, we've been able to drive our yields up from a low of around 40% early in the program to, for the year 2020, 68%. And in fact, today our yields are running a little over 70%. And that's driven in large part by trying to find outlets for more and more of the material that's being generated. If you look at all of the material that was diverted from the landfill, that's 77 plus million pounds for the year 2020, and you use the EPA greenhouse gas calculator for the warm model, you would find that that's about the equivalent of taking 5,200 cars off the road every year at that level of recycling that takes place. So let's go ahead and take a look at the sustainability progress in California, and we look at this slide. If you look at this comparative slide and look at the bottom green line, you'll see that the overall recycling rate for carpet in the state of California has, since the beginning of 2015, executed a steady, significant upward climb. In fact, if you calculate the slope of that line is going up 20% a year every year for the last 5 years, including the year 2020, where the rate did only go up 20% for that particular year. But in light of the pandemic, we felt it was a pretty remarkable accomplishment that we were able to once again increase the recycling rate. I will contrast that with what's going on in the state of California, which is the orange line at the top. The state has a mandatory 75% recycling rate by January 1st, 2020, but you can see that in 2014, the rate began to decline and has done so at a steady pace through 2019. And my forecast for the state, unfortunately, is that it'll go down again in 2020, contributed in part by the pandemic. You might ask why I show a slide like this. Well, I show it to say that there are reasons why, legitimate reasons why the California rate continues to drop. Some of it has to do with the China national sword that Scott mentioned earlier, but there's a lot of other factors in the marketplace. I call these headwinds that we have to buffet against to enable carpet recycling. And in the carpet recycling world, we're facing all the same buffeting headwinds that California and other states are facing. And interesting to note, in the early years of CARE, we did send a fair percentage of carpet outside of the US, mostly to the Asia Pacific area. But in the last several years, we send virtually no carpet out of the United States. So when China national sword hit, a lot of people thought, well, you don't ship anything out, so there's no impact on your recycling. Well, it turns out that when you stop sending all the other commodity plastics and other materials outside the United States, they stay in the United States. And all of a sudden, all these recyclers have a whole lot of inventory. And the only way to move that inventory is to lower the prices. So the carpet materials, even though they were US market focused, saw significant downward pressure on pricing and demand because they now had to compete with low-cost commodity materials that were staying in the United States as a result of the China national sword. I will share with you kind of a sneak peek that the Q1 data, while I won't share the number yet at this point in time because it's not been released publicly, is going to show yet another uptick for Q1 of 2021. So I think that what I'll say is let's move on to the next slide and talk about kind of our strategy here. CARE executed a two-part strategy over the last 5 years. The first strategy was to build capacity primarily in the state of California, and at the same time try to create and expand demands for products that contain post-consumer carpet and markets to buy those products. And I know one of our questions was a procurement related question. And I would say, getting specifications into procurement activities, including public procurement. We don't expect public procurement to solve the demand problem, but the public procurement process can go a long way to help enable creating demand for these materials. Once we created a critical infrastructure for processing post-consumer carpet, we got signals in late 2019 that it was time to shift the focus to the second part of the strategy, which was to grow collections. So we launched a significant effort in that area in late 19, early 2020, only to have the efforts come to pretty much a screeching halt in around the end of the first quarter with the implementation of the pandemic. So we are back on track with some massive efforts in that capacity, but CARE, despite that, CARE currently supports a private collection network, which are run by the recyclers, that has over 180 private network sites where recyclers go out and strike deals with carpet retailers, installers to capture that demand. In addition, CARE has 86 public drop-off sites, and that number continues to grow. So it's probably important to recognize also that in the collection process, we recognize about 1/3 of the theoretical volume in the marketplace is what we might call low-hanging fruit. relatively easy to get to, fairly efficient. You can park 53-foot trailers, load them up and transport them. So it's a very efficient process, both economically and logistically. Unfortunately, once you cross that roughly 1/3 threshold, prices and logistics begin to escalate because now you're having to go further out to collect, and you're having to take longer to fill containers, which you're also paying to lease. So there's a lot of practical experience CARE has gained in running the public drop-off sites, especially because we tend to service the more rural areas. And I'll comment on that in just a minute. So if we could go to the next slide, Amanda.
Bob, sorry to interrupt.
Yes, sir.
Just a couple more minutes because we want to make sure we have some time for questions. We've got a couple coming in, and I want to encourage others to send in their questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, I think we do have a few minutes at the end, but I'll try to pick this up a little, Scott. So CARE, one of the things CARE does to help enable collections as well as capacity growth is to issue grants. We support capital grants, and we also support grants for product development and testing. And in addition, grants for what we call micro grants to enable municipalities and small players to get collection containers, buy stairs, put in covers to keep material dry. To date, CARE has issued more than 8 million grants to help grow carpet recycling in the state of California and continues to run that program. Next slide, Amanda. The challenge we're facing today is how do we continue to ramp up collections as the demand for these materials to grow, and it's important that we keep them dry. These are just some examples of the kinds of information that we use for outreach to reach out to retailers, installers, communities, municipalities. But it's important to also keep in mind that it takes time to build the kind of knowledge and infrastructure that makes this possible. Next slide, please. Collections in rural areas, I mentioned earlier, is cost and logistically more challenging. Experience has taught us now that rural collections is probably 2 to 3 times more expensive than collection in urban areas. And I think anytime you're thinking about a program, it's really important to understand that. It's easy to say, well, we want collection for everybody in the state, and you got a lot of very rural areas in a state. But if you think about it from a priority point of view, if you're looking to enable early successes, you got to focus on the high density areas where most of the material is going to be located. Get your logistics, backroom operations in place. And CARE has a lot of experience at doing this. So we have a voice of logic here. The next slide, please. I'm going to just reference the COVID challenge. We have a fund balance that we carry in California, and that excess fund balance enabled us to take some very rapid actions to respond to COVID, which resulted in being able to maintain the infrastructure that we had invested in California and avoid loss of that infrastructure due to either temporary or permanent shutdowns. The only thing I'll emphasize on that is that COVID is an extreme example of an unexpected event. And so it's important when one thinks about these programs to think about the unintended consequences and the unexpected consequences that throw you a ringer that you have to have the ability to adapt and respond to. Next slide, Amanda. We've run into a lot of challenges in getting our operations up and running. Again, in the interest of time, I won't talk about these in detail, but it was very surprising to us to see projects that we had funded through grants be delayed by 1 or more years just due to the permitting process. We've had a lot of supply chain hiccups, especially exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. That means both getting materials fabricated because there are no workers in the plants, getting the materials transported because transportation costs are going through the roof, and or they've been slowed for a variety of reasons. We've had one startup delayed by almost 2 years as a result of failure by PG&E in California to be able to energize the plant so that they can run their equipment, and a couple other items that are on that list. So Amanda, if you can
So Bob,
the
just
next-
another minute, please. We've got a couple of questions and we've got to end in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to jump ahead a couple slides here. They'll be in the deck when people get a look at them. I mentioned earlier, AB 2729 required us to put in differential assessments and take into account post-consumer content. I want to give you a feel for what we've done after over a year's worth of analytical work, understanding the financial burden to recycle. We've come up with a two-tier system. You have to remember that whatever system you come up with has to be implemented commercially at the point of purchase. You have to educate and train the retail sales force. You have to be able to educate and communicate with the consumer. And you have to be able to manage this information to feed these point of purchase systems from the manufacturing slide. So meeting a number of criteria, we came up with a 4-parameter approach to do this. It takes into account different materials and different levels of post-consumer carpet. An example of what happens when these concepts get out of control is, here's one where we looked at it based on broadloom versus tile and took into account different fiber types and 2 different consumer levels. You got now a matrix of 16 different options, which becomes a nightmare when it comes to implementation. That was slide 20, Amanda. Sorry, I jumped ahead and didn't give you the heads up on that. And if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to end up and share with you a couple lessons learned here. Realistically, it takes a lot longer to do this than anybody expects, even with the best of intentions. Unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in. Building infrastructure, managing capital investments, and the unexpected delays that go with that have set back, almost without exception, every single project that we've seen or facilitated or supported through grants in California and outside California for the last 5 or 6 years. Most of those factors are outside of our control. For example, I mentioned permits and power being to energize a solution. I want to emphasize that it's really important to bring expertise to the table. A lot of people come with good intentions, but they don't have the experience of understanding the economics, capital project management, supply chain flow, logistical, and technology platforms for recycling. And a lot of mistakes get made according to that. I know a lot of folks rely on waste characterization studies to estimate flows. Our experience now working with Cascadia out of Seattle, Washington has taught us that if you have a normal distribution material in your waste flow, the tools that are used today are good. If you've got a non-normal distribution like carpet, the estimates are wildly inaccurate, and therefore the error ranges are very large. So talk to CARE about how do you manage something like that. And finally, my last thought is, if you're talking about legislation, it's important to talk to people that have the experience and knowledge to avoid unintended consequences. I mentioned earlier, we've seen some legislation passed that was flawed, and the experience that we had could have avoided that, but our input was not taken or was not requested. So I think I'll stop there and go ahead and open it up to questions, Scott.
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. So let me start with Dana Barlow's question. I think you might have mentioned this, but how is the California overall recycling rate calculated? On what basis?
Yeah, so it's what we use is a formula, and it starts with the sales of carpet. So if we want to estimate how many pounds of material is being taken out and sent to the landfill every year, we start with the sale of new carpet. We multiply that by 85% because we know about 85% of the time somebody is replacing old carpet with new, so they're ripping out the old carpet. The other 15% is new construction, so there's no rip out associated with that. That's in square yards of sales. We convert the square yards of sales to weight, and we do that by getting the average weight per square yard of carpet through an annual survey that we do. We take that number and multiply it by a factor for deselection. How often is carpet being taken out of a facility, but some other flooring is going in? So they're deselecting carpet and replacing it with something else. That's deselection. And there's a fair bit of controversy over that number, especially with the growth of LVT that I mentioned. And then the last factor is demolition. A building's being ripped down, an estimate of how many square yards of carpet is in that building that's being demolished, sent to the landfill, but does not is not represented by new carpet. That becomes the denominator of the calculation. The numerator is simply the recycled output that we produce on a quarterly basis, and that gives us our recycling rate ratio.
Bob, is another way to say it, it's the amount that is actually recycled over what is available to be collected?
I think that's probably a simplified way to say it, Scott, because unfortunately, not everything that's collected can be recycled. So a typical recycler will tell you that they will take in somewhere between, if they're really good, 5%, and if they really don't have a good supplies, they'll have 12, 15% of waste in the stream. And then there's a percentage of the carpet that the pieces are too small to identify. They're contaminated in some way. They're wet. And occasionally a load comes in with a rodent infestation. That whole load is dumped because you don't want to contaminate your recycling facility.
Okay, thanks. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have right now to keep us on schedule, but I want to encourage people to stay after 3 Eastern time. We're going to go 3 to 3:30 for all the questions, so keep putting them in. If you can stay till then, that would be great. Want to keep us on time. Amanda, back to you.
Moving ahead to our next panel, which I'll let you introduce, Scott, and you've already reminded folks to stay, but really, please do stay for more Q&A. Thanks.
All right, thanks so much. Great. So you see our smiling faces here. We have our panelists from the left, Suna Bayrakal, who's Director of Policy and Programs here at the Product Stewardship Institute. Suna is an experienced policy analyst and researcher with expertise in both policy and operational aspects of EPR programs. She works on about 8 different products here at PSI. And her specialty on her PhD was on the intersection of technology and policy. Next to me, looking at you there on the right, is Risa Domino. Risa is Senior Consultant at RRS, is widely recognized for her expertise on plastics recycling, recycled PET usage and markets, and transformational technology and product stewardship policy. And also Garth Hickel, who's an independent consultant. He was formerly with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and whose carpet EPR expertise has contributed to bill development and other initiatives around the country. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have a facilitated conversation for 25 minutes, and then Q&A for about 10 minutes here. So I'm going to start. We've got all of you available. Excellent, excellent. And the first question I'm going to direct here to Risa, and please, Garth and Suna, jump in to add to it as you would like. But this one's about the key elements of the bills, Risa. And if you could discuss the key element of bills in the 4 states that have the legislation this year: New York, Illinois, Minnesota, and Oregon. And what about those elements would, do you think is most important to have effective EPR programs and to contribute to their success?
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for having me here on this panel. It's been a pleasure to work with the carpet recyclers on legislation for New York for the past year and a half. I think as we look at carpet EPR, very similar to other EPR programs, we need to look at some key areas to ensure good program performance. Those are things like governance. Do you have one producer responsibility organization or more than one? What's the makeup of the board? How are those decisions made? Financing, how do we ensure that there's a sustainable funding stream for the programs moving forward? Goals and performance standards, and those can take the shape of performance goals, meaning recycling rates, collection rates, and recycling rates that need to be achieved. They can also take the form of collection convenience standards. You need to have collection sites within a certain radius of people or in a certain geographic area, that sort of thing. And they also can take the form of minimum recycled content legislation. So requirements that carpet producers use a proportion of recycled materials in new carpets. And then what we've done in New York, and I think we'll increasingly see in carpet and other EPR programs, is incorporate a toxics phase out element. So in the New York bill, we have focused on phasing out PFAS in the production of new carpets, and also phasing out the use of adhesives more broadly across the board in carpet use. So those are some key things. I think each bill approaches those a little bit differently. I think they all envision a fee-based system as exists in California for financing, but they enable that in different ways. So for example, in New York, it's really problematic for us to specifically dictate a fee in legislation. So that's not a part of the legislative approach, but the structure in the bill allows for that financing mechanism to be put into place. And then in terms of governance, there's been a lot of dialogue around carpets, around how the producer responsibility organization should be structured. Should it be a multi-stakeholder board? Should it be a producer-only board? And I think that the legislation in the different states varies in that regard, but there are some definitely good benefits to both of those approaches. So I'll just lay that out there as context and let Suna and Garth weigh in.
Great. All right. Well, who would like to jump in there? Suna, it looks like you're about to go.
Jump in. I don't know, Garth, if you're ready.
And since I work with you here, I have to let you go. So
yeah.
Go for it.
Well, Garth's the guest, so I don't know. But anyway, Risa went first, so I'll go next. Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely concur. I would just say, you know, we worked, Risa talked about working on the New York bill. We've worked a lot on a carpet bill in Oregon, had worked a little bit on some on a New York bill a couple of years ago, as well, provided input into that. And we've had, you know, as a national organization, kind of reviewing and monitoring and evaluating the bills across the country. But I would concur with Risa. I mean, those elements that she mentioned definitely are those that give them an opportunity for success. And I just was going to kind of follow up, you know, with this strong performance goals of all the bills that have been introduced. It really provides an incentive to design for recyclability. Having strong goals means you want to be able to recycle the carpet as much as possible. It also drives education and outreach to ensure a flow of quality materials. I mean, those education outreach could be a standalone element, but strong performance goals will also drive that. And those are also addressed in all the bills. I would say, you know, definitely the sustainable financing piece and using differentiated fees to take into account the financial and environmental burden of a carpet and differentiate, I'm sorry, by material, recycling cost, recycled content, and also, as Risa mentioned, you know, toxicity. The Oregon bill also has an aspect where that's seeking to phase out the PFAS and, you know, incentivize the reduction of toxics as well. Governance as well, you know, most of, if not all the bills have a multi-stakeholder component in them. This really provides greater program transparency and an opportunity for local governments, retailers, the waste management sector, the processors, and new product manufacturers who are using the feedstock from those processors to provide ongoing input into the program, which will really help ensure the program works for them and result in a more effective and successful implementation. Just one other element I would add is the the element of having a plan renewal to take advantage of lessons learned that allows adjustment based on lessons learned, kind of beyond just amendments to a program. You know, when conditions and context changes, and you know, sort of lack of a plan renewal kind of limits the way or the extent to which a program can be improved based on you know, unforeseen events. So I think I'll
Great.
stop there and
Thank you,
Garth
Sina.
jumped in.
So Garth, would you like to add? We've got some similarities here, quite a few across the bills. The one in Oregon, the PSI is working on, RRS working on the New York one. You've been working on Minnesota and other ones as well. How about your perception on this?
Yeah, well, thanks, Scott. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I just wanted to kind of first pick up on some of the comments that Bob had made about the challenges that CARE and the manufacturers and the recyclers have encountered with the California program. And I wouldn't necessarily posit it as due to the California program, but more as a result of, I mean, here we are, you know, we're 20 years down the road on this topic, and we really are relying on one state to build a national recycling infrastructure at this point. And so I think it's really important for us to kind of step back and think about if carpet recycling is going to grow in the US, we really do need a consistent regulatory model to be able to support that. I think we've seen that across the other product categories that have been addressed under EPR systems, and having a certain degree of consistency is really important in terms of supporting that investment from recyclers, the lending community, and so forth. And so, you know, I'm of the opinion that, you know, we are moving into very much of a carbon constrained world, and that recycling is going to become an increasingly important focus to be able to support some of those state objectives to meet the climate goals. So more specifically is kind of what are some of the topics that and themes within legislation that'd be necessary to move us in that direction around consistency. And I think, you know, kind of taking off what both Risa and Sunez said, I think there's a couple of those themes which are really key. One is governance, and Risa kind of laid out, you know, some of those options that are under consideration, but I think kind of stepping back and thinking about having a kind of national strategy, even if it's implemented at the state level, what does that actually mean then for governance? And I think clearly what we've seen from Paint Care, the Mattress Recycling Council, and others, that having that kind of an industry-led effort is really critical, and really making that kind of clear lines of accountability, authority, and decision-making residing with the producers is key. And so again, kind of looking at that from a national perspective, having one or in some cases more, and I'll talk about that in a moment, stewardship organizations or PROs being able to function in multiple states, I think is really important. The whole question about whether there should be multiple organizations or not, I think we are moving into an era, kind of given the incredible increase in e-commerce and some other distribution channels, that we may see some opportunities where having the residential product system set up separately from that serving commercial and institutional purchasers may make sense. And so anyway, we don't need to go into that in any more detail, but I think, you know, that is something that I think is going to be more front and center as we move forward. Also, in terms of just the performance goals, I'm definitely of the opinion that having qualitative measures laid out in statute that have to be identified in a quantitative fashion as part of the plan makes a lot more sense than actually stipulating specific numbers in statute. We see a lot of having to return to the legislature to change specific numbers in statute. And so embedding that within the plan of having actually legally enforceable goals, whether it's for collection, processing, closed loop recycling, and so forth is really key. Another is really focusing on the reporting and making sure that that is transparent, frequent, and that's both from the obligated entities, the stewardship organizations or PROs to the state agency, but also from the state agency to the legislature to make sure that those ultimate decision makers are informed about what is happening in the context of the program. So, I know that was, at an extremely high level, but look forward to further discussion and then any questions that folks may have.
Great, thank you. Thanks for all three of you. I want to pick up the issue of governance and maybe to elucidate a little bit for the audience here. I mean, it's an issue, as we all know, because of the producers, they're paying for this, at least in a cost internalization system, which all the other bills are looking for. I think Illinois will be moving towards that next, as opposed to California's fee system. But there's a tug of war, right? You're mentioning governance, and it's really to moderate the forces, the interests between the producers themselves and the other actors, the collectors, the recyclers, the local governments, particularly, and even state as an oversight agency. So we see that a lot in packaging right now. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more, maybe Risa, you've brought this up to start. How do you see carpet? Because there hasn't been the harmony yet that we'd all like to see on the carpet program, right? And on packaging, a lot of the local governments and states are scared to death about letting the producers take this over when they've been fighting to take control for so long. So what kind of governance system do you think might make the most sense as we start up on carpet, as Garth mentioned, some kind of model? And Suna mentioned advisory committee and multi-stakeholders. So I'm wondering what you might throw out as a good governance model for carpet.
Yeah, so I think it's the crux of the challenge is the producers who are responsible for funding the system and meeting the objectives and meeting the goals of the statute. If they're on the line to do that, they need to be able to make the decisions they need to make, put the programs in place that they need to put in place to get to that goal. Otherwise, you wind up in a sort of circular firing squad situation. 3 years later, 5 years later, you haven't hit the goal, and the producers say, "Well, we couldn't because our, this stakeholder and that stakeholder and the other stakeholder wouldn't allow us to take the actions we needed to take to get there." So we need to have a system, a governance system in place that makes sure that the producers, whether or not they wanted to be in this system to begin with, will actually come forward and do what they need to do to meet the goals. And that's really the tension. And I think it's similar in packaging and carpets, where people just don't quite feel comfortable that the people who are obligated will really do what needs to be done to meet the obligations of the statute. And so I think that some really strong models are out there that include a producer-run organization with some advisory oversight, in addition to the state agency oversight, some multi-stakeholder advisors that really engage with the agency in the review of the program plan, in the annual reporting, in the course correction that Suna talked about. That really important. How are things going? What needs to change? Are we getting to goal? And all of those things, so that we move forward and ultimately meet the objective. So I think there are a lot of different ways you can do that, but I think that's a good model, looking at a strong producer organization with very clear obligations, and requirements about what they need to do, and then some strong oversight and engagement from multiple stakeholders supporting the agency and its enforcement role.
Anyone else want to add a quick rejoinder to that? Because we've got a bunch of questions coming in here, and I hope we can maybe keep the answers a little bit shorter as we go through. There's so much to say, so I apologize for that, but we've got some more time in 15 minutes here to open it up. Garth, Suna, anything to add?
Yeah, well, just on that question, I really like the idea of an advisory committee, because the advisory committee is actually, in most cases, you know, an arm, if you will, of the state agency, that the members are appointed by the director or commissioner of the agency and directly provides feedback to that regulatory authority about how the program is doing. And so there's a nice kind of separation between those who actually have the legal and financial responsibility to be able to fund the program, while obviously having an opportunity for the advisory council or committee to directly communicate with the PRO or stewardship organization about any challenges that may be upcoming as a result of the program in that particular state. Having the advisory council have an opportunity to review the stewardship plans before it actually gets submitted for formal review and approval. So I think that there is some ways to really kind of hardwire that role of the advisory committee without coming up with a mixed kind of governance structure. As I think most of us who've served in state government before, is that state governments are loath to take regulatory action against local governments. And so having local governments sitting on an organization that then the state agency has direct authority over, you can see that some of those lines of accountability, action, and correction become much less clear.
I was just going to add to that some of the language specifically, I mean, it definitely has more teeth than some of the models we've seen in the past, where the advisory committee actually provides recommendations and the producer or stewardship organization has to explain why it didn't incorporate some of those recommendations into the plan or the annual report or audits, and explain how it might do so in the future, change the plan. And there's also more requirements for the advisory committee to meet more frequently than some of the advisory committees have been meeting in other EPR laws. So to increase the contact and the interaction as well.
Okay, thanks. So let me turn to another question here before I open it. There's a bunch of questions coming in from the audience. One is alternative flooring. So, you know, carpet here, as we see, I think that the sales of carpet's going down a good part because people are choosing alternative, the hardwoods or the vinyl flooring, luxury vinyl tile. And I'm wondering, you know, your thoughts about the need for EPR systems for the other types of flooring in order to have it as a competitive, a level playing field, if you will, rather than carpet itself being at a competitive disadvantage. And Suna, I'm wondering if you want to start that one off.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm seeing analogies to, I mean, Scott mentioned I work on a number of different product areas, and I see analogies to some of the other product areas, but I think, you know, a broader product scope that incorporates, you know, more flooring types is advantageous. In terms of analogies, you know, in the lighting industry, LEDs have replaced fluorescent lamps at a much quicker rate than I think had been anticipated. And so in some of the lights EPR programs, this has been an issue with funding of recycling of lights. You know, I think also in general, when you have a broader product scope, you can have more consistent messaging. People aren't as confused about what, you know, can be recycled, what can't be recycled, you know, as these technologies change. So.
Yeah, so I just want to mention artificial turf is in there on the carpet bills. So I don't know if anyone's putting in artificial turf into your living rooms yet, but Risa, Garth, anything to add to what Suna mentioned?
Yeah, sure. I think, unlike the European Union and how they've approached EPRs, that we've had, much more of a kind of a la carte approach, if you will, so that generally not all of the products that perform a similar function are included in the stewardship program. So for instance, I'm a little bit removed from the paint program at the moment, but the whole question about why was spray paint not included was an enduring comment. Same thing with electronics. We certainly do not have that broad scope that is in place. So I think that given the amount of carpet in the waste stream, as well as the climate impacts, it's very legitimate to start with that. Now, having said that, many of the carpet companies are now flooring companies, and so being able to migrate to other flooring types at some point, I think would be substantially easier than it may be with some of the other product categories that have been under consideration.
Yeah, and I would just add that there's definitely a challenge on the back end in terms of recovery of some of these other flooring options. And certainly, if you follow the big pile of stuff theory to recycling, that, if you collect a big pile of stuff, somebody will figure out what to do with it. You could think about an EPR program in advance of that recovery technology, but there is a little bit of a balance that needs to be struck there. And I think Garth is on point that there are very clear and compelling reasons to target carpet. And given that AstroTurf can be recycled in the same systems that carpet is, bring it on. But some of these others are a little bit more challenging to think about.
Great. Okay, Risa, another question here for you from Alicia Culver. Do carpet adhesives reduce the recyclability of carpet? Does that include both peel and stick, as well as wet applied adhesives? Technical question here.
Yeah.
What is the alternative for both carpet tile and broadloom carpet products being purchased by government agencies and businesses?
So adhesive is definitely challenging in the recycling process, and that is part of the reason, in addition to the VOCs, that we're looking to phase them out in New York. I am not an expert on adhesive, so I'm not going to comment on the differences between the two. I think there are alternatives available, I believe, for all but tile, but again, it's not my expertise. I don't know if Garth or Suna knows more about that. No? Sorry, Lisa, we'll get back to you.
All right, get back. Here's one. It's another one here from Ray Eaton on chemicals as well, and we'll see, if this falls into the "we'll get back to you" bucket. But talking about the bans on chemicals, we mentioned it takes them out. Should be easier to recycle, but is it possible to remove toxics from carpet during the recycling process, or if a state were to ban PFAS in carpet, would carpets manufactured with PFAS prior to the ban have to be landfilled instead of recycled? Great question. Getting into, we don't want these back into products again, right? Risa, looks like you're about to jump in.
Yeah, so I think there are, depending on how the carpet is recycled, the PFAS may or may not stay with the carpet fiber. So if it's chemically recycled, that may come out in the depolymerization process and be filtered out in that process. If it's mechanically recycled, it may be sort of stabilized with the product. That's my understanding. I don't know, Garth or Suna, if you have anything to add?
No, I don't on that. I just would like to say, obviously, that the states are grappling with PFAS and waste management really substantially. So putting PFAS-laden carpet into landfills is probably not what we want to be doing either. It's a real conundrum.
Yeah, we do have our recycling experts coming tomorrow. So these are great questions. We can recycle our questions back to the technical experts for tomorrow. Here's a question. It's for Garth from Doug Cobold from California Product Stewardship Council, but I think it could be for any of you as well. He says, the carpet, mattresses, and paint programs in California all get their funding from visible consumer fees, not from the industry that the products represent. So it's consumers paying that fee, as you know, at the retail. Do you believe that the industry creating these products should be in charge of running the product stewardship programs when they have no financial stake in the game? Start with Garth.
Yeah, sure. Well, quickly, it's my understanding with the carpet fee that is actually remitted to care by the producers, not from the retailers to the producers. So I think that's a pretty fundamental difference from what one would conceive of as a retail collected and remitted eco fee, like with mattresses. So it does allow the manufacturers to decide how that is being, that those costs are being managed. It may be that it's ending up as an increased fee to the consumers. We will never know that, probably. So I think there's some important nuances between the visible fee models. I do think that they have, if we're not going to, if this assumption is that that anything visible then requires a full-blown kind of multi-stakeholder approach, then I would advocate that just doing the product tax is a substantially easier instrument than actually going through and constructing a EPR program. So I think it's important for the manufacturers to engage in the design and operation of the programs, to get feedback in terms for product design choices going forward, and actually have some stake in the game. I'm a little, I think in terms of the retailer administered but producer remit model, I don't think that's identical to a purely retail collected remit model.
Anyone else? Suna? Risa?
I was just going to say, I mean, they may not have a financial stake if it's, consumer funded, but, they're still on the hook for performance goals and can have financial penalties associated with not reaching those goals and properly and effectively implementing the program. So, I mean, there is that as well. So just thought I'd add that.
All right. So we only have a couple of minutes left here, and I know Amanda's going to come right in and give me the hook or turn us over to the open Q&A period. And this is a big question. All right. So I'm warning you, and we'll go over maybe a minute or two. We'll see. What are your opinions on carpet as a key feedstock for chemical advanced recycling? Oh boy, hot button issue. The environmental community, really, the word just drives a lot of people crazy because there's such a range of what we consider chemical recycling or advanced recycling. But what do you see the opportunities are for chemical or advanced recycling with carpet?
So I think, first of all, I want to just pick up on what you just said, Scott, about the range of chemical recycling options. I actually hate that term because it just lumps together a number of different technologies, some of which I believe to be truly circular in their approach, while some are waste to fuel or waste to energy types of technologies. And I think we need to draw a very bright line from a regulatory, definitional, and other basis on the technologies that are circular, that are taking these materials, these resins, back to virgin-like for the reuse in products versus those that are going to fuel or to energy. So if we're looking at those circular type technologies, they offer a terrific opportunity to take carpet, this very low value in its, after its use as a carpet, a low value, difficult to handle material, and recovering that material to the point where it can replace virgin resin at very high quality into very high value applications. So it's really upcycling that material and I think adds a lot of value into the system in that way. Some of the mechanical technologies, which are also very valuable, but they tend to produce durable products that live a long time and play an important part in the economy, but are not going to feed into that circular economy and not going to be recovered again and again. So I think there's an important role for chemical recycling to play in that positive, that depolymerization type of technology that leads to that circularity. And I think carpet provides a large volume material to baseload some of those investments that really need to be pretty big in order to make sense.
Suna and Garth, any addition to that?
Yeah, just real quickly, I'm not nearly as knowledgeable on the topic as Risa is. I would just kind of call for some significant analysis about the environmental benefits or potential drawbacks of each of the technologies. And I agree that there really does need to be a much different kind of taxonomy developed so that there is a hierarchy for policymakers to really be able to understand, what we're actually trying to achieve here.
Great. All right. Well, tomorrow, I know Eastman. I've seen all the videos, and I know that Eastman has a process that they're going to be talking about, and some of the other remanufacturers will also be discussing this topic as well. And Risa, maybe you can come up with a new term, a better term for this, or maybe we could even have like a contest here at PSI, and we can, see who has a better term that is more fitting. But I want to thank the three of you for being on this panel here. Please stick around. I think that this here, what Amanda has put up, this slide, is not only a thank you for the three of you, but it's welcoming Bob back onto the stage here. So Bob, if you could if you could show your video, please, and come back on if you're still with us.
And I'll just take this opportunity, Scott, to thank everyone who does have to leave for their time and their questions today. We hope you can join us tomorrow. When you do leave the event, there will be a survey. We ask you to please take a few moments of your time to tell us what you thought. Your feedback matters to us and helps us to create great events moving forward. Tomorrow's session, we're talking about technologies. We'll be talking with U.S. carpet recyclers, manufacturers using advanced processing and recycling technologies, as well as a municipal government collector and an environmental attorney about the reasons that carpet recycling is so important. And we hope that we will see you there. So back to you, Scott, and our panelists for our extended Q&A period.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to go back up to the top here. Welcome Bob back in. We'll switch gears a little bit, but we have many questions. So Bob, this one is Eric Nelson, and I think Garth was alluding to this as well. So let's see if I've got the right question. I think I do. So with the California rate now about 20% and rising, and the other 49 states at 4% on average and dropping, would you agree that it's logical that new policy in other states is critical for the growth of the industry? So more policies in other states. Bob, what are your thoughts on that?
Just for clarity, Scott, when you asked that question, or when Eric asked that question, is he talking about EPR legislation specifically, or I'm not sure of the context?
I think he probably is, but you can answer it any way you like. If this is too hot a question for you, I'm sure that Risa and Garth and Suna could answer this one. But
well, I see.
From your perspective as an industry person, what are your thoughts on the need for additional policies in order to generate increased recycling rates?
Well, Risa's got such a big smile. I'm going to defer to her to kick this one off. How's that? She's got some thoughts here.
I think that the data pretty clearly shows that while there's a lot of value in recovered carpet, and the a host of companies have really shown there's promise and value in that material, there's not nearly enough value to cover the full cost of collection, processing, and preparation for market. And so there needs to be a policy instrument in order to make that collection and processing work. And there needs to be sustainable financing to do that.
The one thought I'll throw out there, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak quantitatively on this, but I know, Garth, you referred to a carbon constrained world in the future. I think there's some value to be captured from that side of the equation. I know everybody's looking for subsidies to make things work, but at some point in time, you build a house of cards and you can't really sustain it. So we got to find some other mechanisms to do this. It's a very oversimplified statement to say, but something that's the equivalent of carbon credits, or the Chicago Climate Exchange, what they try to do. That kind of concept, we don't have the answer yet, but that kind of concept could be a factor that could play into this to help us get where we need to go. We're not talking about a trivial amount of money here. And unfortunately, if you think about the investment in the infrastructure that exists today, there's literally trillions of dollars in the virgin-based infrastructure that exists. And, it's not reasonable to expect companies to just walk away from that. So we got to find a bridge to traverse that divide. The other thing, it may be indirectly related to this question, but from my time in Washington, when you talk about toxic materials, one of the things that occurred to me, and what I tried to encourage people to think about, is if you're going to deal with toxics, you got to find a way to create a runway so people aren't penalized for doing the right thing. If you say you want to get a material that's considered toxic out of the product, and then a company steps forward to do that, and all of a sudden some overzealous attorney decides to sue that company or that industry for doing the right thing, that's a big negative incentive. So I think that's got to be part of the dialogue on how do we resolve these types of barriers if we're going to make this progress going forward.
Bob, you mentioned in your presentation that the law was flawed in California, and I'm wondering what you would do to fix it.
Well, that's not a simple question, Scott, but none of these are. So
in 2 minutes or less.
Well, I'll have to talk very fast, won't I? I would say that the way to fix the flaw is to engage the people that are knowledgeable enough to think about, the experiences that we have to guide us, and to think critically about the consequences of the legislation or the decisions that are trying to be made going forward. I think some of the legislation we see, there's an old expression, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So some of this activity is based on people that take a position that benefits their own operations. And that's where the not thinking through the consequences for everything comes into play. So seeking out that kind of extended dialogue and deep understanding is how you avoid those types of problems.
Okay, really, Garth, go ahead. Look like you're about to add. You're on mute though.
Pardon me, thanks. I think one of the fundamental challenges and flaws of the kind of initial program in California was the lack of any defined numerical performance goals. That was really problematic because I think it created difficulty for CARE to know what was the objective that they were achieving. There was no kind of consensus about hitting a particular number and the infrastructure that needed to be developed to be able to attain that. So, and I think that that's a really important lesson for those of us who work in this space, is just kind of relying on reasonably achieve or increasing or what have you is just not sufficient when we're talking about particularly trying to incentivize development of a new industry. And there really needs to be kind of a clear set of targets and goals that are associated with that.
Suna?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think I agree with Garth. I think that's definitely good to have something clear to aim for. I would also say maybe the fact that in terms of a clear standard, also convenience standards, that there weren't convenience standards in the law as well. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's where I was just going to ask you that question. So a good prompt for me. So you work on many different products, and there's been sort of a move, what I've seen over the past 20 years, from got to have performance targets to we need performance targets and convenience standards. Some would say, well, convenience standards might be even more important or easier to get. And I'm wondering, Suna, if you can comment on that for carpet, if you think there should be both, or is consumer convenience easier to enforce and comply with? And if you can explain that also to people who aren't as up to speed as you and I on this.
Yeah, so I mean, you mean explain a convenience standard. So it might be, X number of permanent collection sites per county, or a certain number of events per year in a county, or there's also standards in the existing carpet bills for, having a collection site within 15 miles or 15-minute drive of X number of residents, to make sure that convenience is statewide, even in small communities, rural communities as well. So, so that's essentially a convenience standard. I mean, I think there have been challenges, and as Bob explained, the recycling rate calculation, it's complicated to determine what's available to collect. So sometimes it is challenging to try to determine that in some respects, but the industry has an idea of what's sold and what the expected, all the criteria that Bob mentioned as well. I think both are important. I think also another aspect of performance goals that I've seen in some of the other product areas too, and growing, is like having public awareness goals. So making sure that there's awareness about the program as well, sometimes in lieu of a performance goal, but I think they're both important.
Hey, Scott,
Bob?
can I add a thought to that? When it comes to performance goals, I think it's probably worth being pragmatic from the point of view that just because we create a performance goal, we shouldn't view that as black and white. The world's not black and white. There's so many variables that we don't control, and I mentioned some of them, that there's got to be a certain amount of judgment that takes place, because that to me is a formula for, ill will, bad feelings, not collaborative, so not black and white. And the other thing I would say is I think it's important to understand the commodity you're talking about. We're focused in this conversation about carpet, but talking about convenience for carpet, convenience standard for carpet, is very different from a can of paint or from a mattress or a tire. 90% of all the carpet is handled by professional installers, and it's installed in a home. So the average person is not the person that's ripping out the carpet and making it available for recycling. And there's different considerations about collection infrastructure in an area. So again, I've always believed in my entire career that one size does not fit all. So just because something works over here doesn't mean it's going to work over here. You have to take the initial conditions into account. And that's kind of the basis of something called chaos theory, right? Sensitive dependence on initial conditions.
We are definitely experts in chaos theory here in the EPR world.
Yeah.
So here's a question from Peg Hall. It's for you, Bob. Why do you refer to the money paid to recyclers as subsidies. When the producers are charged with financing the program and the recycling of carpet, Peg says, surely this is merely the primary cost of recycling that. A subsidy to her implies that someone thinks the value of the recycled product should be enough to pay for the collection, processing, and disposal of the residuals. Do you think the value of materials ought to be enough to pay for the program if sufficient efficiencies are achieved?
Well, I'm not sure I completely understood that whole question, but my first reaction is that sounds like the ideal approach to a market-based solutions. The value of the material will be sufficient to cover all the costs associated with the operations and to make a profit for the company to sustain them and keep them going. Unfortunately, go ahead.
I think that what Peg's asking is, do you think that with greater efficiencies, you could get to that point of having the carpet have value so it is market-based? Or if not, then why call it a subsidy?
Okay, I guess I don't want to debate the terminology, but I would say that this is why I'm so excited about, and forgive me, Reza, but chemical recycling. I'll use it in the positive context if you're okay with that. You know, where we're really talking about going back to monomeric building blocks where you've purified the material, you got equivalent performance to virgin materials. When I think about companies like Eastman Chemical, Pure Cycle, Indorama, large Shell Chemical, large hundreds of millions of pounds of material a year. That's the kind of game-changing technology that can have a huge impact on the carpet recycling world. You know, today we struggle with finding enough outputs to consume all the material. Well, one plant coming on at 300 million pounds a year of output is going to demand 500 or 600 million pounds of input. That can do two things. Number one, it can change the supply-demand equation, which is really critical to the economics. But number two, in the carpet recycling world, like a lot of other commodities, you're talking about a pennies business. I've seen deals change at 1/4 cent a pound, typically on a penny a pound. And our recyclers live kind of day to day from a cash flow point of view. When you bring large, sophisticated global players to the table that have large investments that require secure, quality, reliable feedstocks, they're going to manage their suppliers differently than the guy that calls you up today, says, Scott, I need 10 truckloads a week, and you start shipping tomorrow. You turn it on, 3 weeks from now, I give you a call, say, Scott, stop shipping. You say, what do you mean? I got all this stuff coming in my plant now. It's filling up the rafters. And I say, well, I don't have the demand for it anymore. And you kind of beg a little bit. And I say, do you know what, Scott? Okay, I'm going to do you a favor. Ship me 3 truckloads a week. But unfortunately, instead of paying 10 cents a pound, I can only pay you 6 cents a pound. This happens every day in the carpet recycling world. And it makes it really tough on the small guys. You get a big player coming in that wants to put in place annual contracts that pays with a reasonable performance target, like 30, 60 days. I've got examples where people are paying 120 plus days or just stringing out recyclers. That kind of sophistication is the kind of evolution of the industry that can help us go to the next level and start looking at market-based solutions. We're not there yet, but I'm hoping the big players in carpet recycling will be turning switches in the next 2 or 3 years.
If I could just add a couple of little points there. For one, I think it's important to remember that virgin plastics are subsidized and virgin materials are subsidized through a number of federal mechanisms. So there is a subsidy in play that we're competing against here. And the other is that with regard to these depolymerization technologies and others, part of the reason they like carpet is because it's relatively inexpensive and voluminous. I think it's probably unrealistic to expect, especially given the low virgin resin prices that we're experiencing now and expect to continue for the foreseeable future. I think it's unrealistic to expect that those technologies or even the big players like Shell and Eastman are going to want to pay a price that's going to cover the cost of collection and processing. So that's why I think policy for the long term is an important solution. It might, I agree with Bob that it will stabilize the markets to have bigger, more substantial players in the game, and it might improve the economics a bit, but I don't think it's gonna yield a market-driven solution. I don't think that's a realistic expectation.
I don't see Suna and Garth unmuting here, so I'm going to ask a question because I don't see any more other than comments here into the chat box, into the Q&A box. So please, if you have more questions, send them and we have more time to ask them. But I have one here that I wasn't able to ask before, and that is, what would you suggest for differential fees based on carpet material? So which materials are actually most costly to manage and should have a higher fee paid by the producers? And what other attributes would you like to see considered? And let's just say, let's take, the first step, the first stage in this, since we know that even Europe is trying to figure this out right now. What would you say would be the best ways to put these differential fees on? Who should pay more? Who should pay less due to the cost of the materials on the system? Garth, you're unmuted. Would you like to give it a try?
Sure. I think that generally the kind of criteria around recyclability is obviously key here. Recycled content, climate profile, and so forth for a particular resin type is important. So I think there's a whole host of those fee design options that could be incorporated in for carpet. And obviously we want to be able to incentivize those issues. I think, it gets somewhat more difficult if we're talking about how does durability, for example, fit into that equation. We certainly don't want to be subsidizing carpet resins that have to be replaced over a very short time frame, whereas another option may be have much more durability and over the course of a 20-year lifespan, for example, actually will have substantial environmental benefits. So it is a difficult decision-making process to go through to be able to identify those criteria and then apply that kind of time aspect to them as well.
Yeah, I think if you look at a variety of EPR programs, I think some of the most innovative fee setting formulas look at incorporating the cost of recycling, look at incorporating the material value or revenue that material will get, and then the use of recycled content, greenhouse gas profile, and other environmental performance factors. And I think having the producer responsibility organization set out that formula for what's going to feed into the fee setting and how that's going to be differentiated is an important part of the planning process in any EPR program.
So 7 years ago, there was a big change, as I mentioned before, from nylon to PET in the carpet, and that really increased the prices a lot. So one would say that there's a greater cost, at least at that point, in PET versus nylon. And I know we're going to hear more tomorrow, and I could save my question for the experts, but just wanted to prime the pump here and see, is this still the case, or are these new technologies that we're going to hear about tomorrow actually changing the recyclability and therefore the lowering the cost of recycling or increasing the value of the materials?
Well, maybe I'll make a comment on that, because we will have the people that have what I call boots on the ground tomorrow to share practical expertise. But, as volumes go up, economy of scale works to your favor. So that's one. We know historically that, if you can't push 2,000 pounds an hour or more through your equipment, you're struggling with, meeting your cash requirements. But I think the sophistication of the equipment that's evolved, and literally, we're still building a brand new industry in the United States. When this whole thing started, there wasn't a single piece of equipment that was designed for carpet. Today, we have people that are trying to build equipment that's specifically engineered to do carpet. I'm going to make Garth smile, and I'll remind him that he had an operation up in Minnesota that used farm equipment to do some of the early processing of post-consumer carpet. And I give them a lot of credit for the innovation they brought to the table doing that. But I think you're starting to see more sophisticated technologies which can produce a better quality output, which means it could compete more effectively in the marketplace. I do think it's going to be a while before we get to an environment where there are stable, robust market-based solutions, but I think we got a few examples of those. So we got to keep pushing the envelope on that particular front. But let's hear what Aquafil and CP tomorrow in particular have to say about that, and the Eastman folks.
Okay, Bob, all the farmers just dropped off the call. I'm sorry with that last comment. Gonna have to get them back for tomorrow.
Okay.
So I don't know if any of you have questions. You know, we're really at the end here and we're winding up, and you know, it's been a really good discussion. I don't know if any of you have any last comments, last thoughts, questions that you would like to throw out right now before we end.
Well, I'll just make a quick observation, and that is that I've always believed that when you're tackling really tough challenges, it's incredibly important to have a very diverse stakeholder group together to talking about it, because of all the different perspectives and experiences, educational backgrounds that get shared among one another into this common pool of knowledge. So I really appreciate everybody's inputs and thoughts here today. I kind of sometimes jokingly call carpet recycling a 5-dimensional problem, like playing 5-dimensional chess. Sometimes I think it's more than that, but these kinds of discussions can help us make progress. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. Garth, did you have some last thought here?
No, I think this was a really, really good discussion today. So I really appreciate everyone taking the time to participate, and then certainly having a good group of participants. So I would really like to see this continue going forward, because I think we really do have an opportunity here to help really address this problem and frankly, create a viable industry going forward.
Great. Suna, looks like you've unmuted. A quick comment, and Risa, and then it looks like we've got Amanda walking us down the path here. These are carpet tiles, like to the end of the session, I think.
No, I just wanted to also say, you know, I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate, you know, having Risa and Garth here, and having Bob have you join us and give your perspective on the program. And I would just say, you know, I think there's been growing interest in, you know, I mean, there's been long interest, as Scott has talked about earlier, but, you know, growing recent interest as the California program has provided lessons learned and is improving over time. So just wanted to say that as we close.
Risa?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think that, you know, we've had a tremendous development in the last few years of technologies to recover all of the different fibers and materials in carpets, including the polyester that was such a problem when you last convened us, Scott. I think, and so we've made that tremendous progress, and now we're at an inflection point where, you know, we're ready to take this to other states, to take it to other markets. And we need the policy in place to really make that work and make that happen, and realize all the climate change and all of the jobs benefits that we could get through increasing carpet recycling.
Great. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for today, for this panel here, and Bob, for your presentation before. We've got a lot more tomorrow. I think this was a great setup for the technology tomorrow. And I just want to echo, Bob, your comments about multi-stakeholders. You need all those different viewpoints in order to solve the problems. It's really complicated. And, you know, you need the perspectives, you need the skills. So hopefully we can apply them moving forward. And with that, Amanda, our host for today, I will hand it back to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists and to Scott for moderating and to all of you for joining us today. Once again, your feedback is really important to us. We want to hear from you. Please take our survey. It's only a few minutes long and helps us to create excellent events going forward. I would also encourage you to join us tomorrow for the session with the carpet recyclers and the US manufacturers using carpet polymers that have been recycled. And again, a huge thank you to our tremendous panel of experts today. Policy discussion has been excellent, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Take care.
Great.